Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes to make sure everyone that wants to can join, and it takes sometimes a few minutes to get connected into the webinar. So for all of you who are participants already signed in, thanks for joining. We're going to give everybody just a couple more minutes to get signed in here, maybe two to three more minutes in the interest of time, and then we will get started with the program. Again, thank you so much for joining, and we will see you in a minute. Okay, I just wanted to say hello and good evening to everyone who is already joined. We've got quite a few people connected as of right now. So again, in the interest of time and it being a little bit later in the evening, we're going to go ahead and get rolling. Just a brief introduction from me. My name is Angela Cummings. I am the Associate Area Director for our AFSP chapter here in Illinois. And I'm really not going to be on screen much today because I want to turn it over to our fabulous DEI committee and our panelists. These are the stars of the evening. They're going to really take us through this amazing discussion, and I'm really glad that you have joined us. So having said that, I will be kind of monitoring the chat box, and if you have any specific questions about AFSP, you could always reach out to me specifically about AFSP in the chat window. Having said that, I think I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to Dimple, who's going to get things rolling. Take it away, Dimple.
Thank you, Angela. So as a part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, we are passionate towards increasing awareness, representation, and fairness to create a safe and welcoming space to foster change to better reflect the communities that we serve. Disparities in access to care and treatment is just one of the many unique obstacles diverse communities face in, in regard to managing their mental health. And when we discuss mental health, it is important to it is impossible to overlook the challenges that face underrepresented groups, and we are dedicated to working together to create an equitable and inclusive culture that's smart about mental health and not just for 1 month, but for each and every day. And on behalf of AFSP Illinois, I want to say thank you so much for coming and being a part of this discussion. If you have any questions, like Angela said, please feel free to type them out and we will do our best to answer them as we go along. And if we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you. With that being said, I would like to introduce you to your moderator for tonight, Tandra.
Thank you very much, Dimple, and thank you, Angela. And there is no better way to start this conversation than with that graphic that you are not alone. And that is the reason that we have joined you all tonight and gathered you all this evening. So thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us for this very important conversation on race, stigma, and mental health. I am Tandra Rutledge. I am an AFSP Illinois board member and mental health advocate. And I want to welcome our very esteemed panelists. We have Alicia Sims Harris, Phil Martinez, and Dr. Swati Varma, who will be sharing their thoughts, experiences, and perspectives with us on this topic. And as Dimple said, as an organization, AFSP is committed to elevating the voices and experiences of Blacks, Indigenous, and other people of color. We want to listen, to learn, and to support their unique needs. We acknowledge that systemic injustices such as racism and discrimination, inadequate access to effective culturally competent healthcare contribute to negative mental health outcomes and directly impact Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color. And we know that there is so much more work for us to be done to dismantle systemic racism in mental health, within the field of mental health and suicide prevention, and to promote mental health equity and healing in communities of color. The panelists and I want to create a safe space for us this evening to share, to be vulnerable with one another, and with each of you who've joined us this evening. We are in the midst of historic events, a global pandemic, and ongoing protests for racial justice. And although these events, we know, have magnified the disparities and inequities faced by Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color, we are also witnessing the resilience and fortitude among many. So tonight we are going to get candid. We're going to have a candid conversation with Alicia, Phil, and Swati. We're going to hear from them in their own words as they challenge and inspire us. Swati, Phil, and Alicia, I'd like for you to take a moment to introduce yourselves and tell us your connection to this topic of race, stigma, and mental health.
Thank you, Tandra. I would like to start off by thanking you for having me today. I'm Swati Varma, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Currently, I work in private practice, and primarily my work is with children and adolescents, as well as expecting and new parents. I personally identify as South Asian, and growing up in a pretty conservative South Asian family, mental illness was often stigmatized. We seldom talked about our feelings in both, the family and within the community, and it was apparent that mental illness was seen as a taboo. Often in our culture, people are labeled as quote unquote crazy, and there's sort of this mentality that personal problems should stay within the family and not be talked about outside of the family setting. My interest in going into the psychology field came partly from being able to raise awareness within this community, as well as an interest in allowing people of color to be able to share their stories. With the racial unrest that the country is currently facing, my goal is to kind of create a safe space where people can feel comfortable having these conversations and feel that their experiences are being heard.
Thank you very much, Swati.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll take next. So hello, everyone. And I want to say thank you, Dimple. Thank you, Tandra. Thank you, Angela. Thank you to the organization for having me tonight. I am truly grateful. My name is Alicia Sims Harris. I am a Midwest native, born and raised from Flint, Michigan. However, I moved to Chicago and spent my adult years there, and that's where I met my partner. And honestly, that is where my healing began, was Chicago. So Chicago is really dear to me in my growth and development. I've been on my journey of healing for about the past 6 years now, and now I am just ready to share my story and to take it to new scopes beyond the table.
Well, we're going to hear a little bit more about your journey in a moment, but we're going to pivot over to Phil and let him introduce himself. Phil, you're muted.
Oh my gosh, not my first time on Zoom, but it seems like it. Thank you, Tandra. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Dimple, for getting this arranged. What an honor it is to be here with Alicia and Swati. Yeah, my journey began way before I became a professional in this field. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor. I'm currently in private practice out in Lisle, Illinois, one of the suburbs of Chicago. And my specialty area is working with youth, teenagers primarily, teenagers and young adults, dealing with a wide variety of issues from depression to anxieties to substance abuse and the like. I've been doing that almost the entirety of my almost 25-year career in mental health. But I'm also a native Chicagoan, born and raised on the southwest side of the city, which the neighborhood I grew up in probably is where my story starts, because it was one of the more racially intolerant areas of the city. And so we were the people of color in the neighborhood. And I remember learning from a very early age on that I was treated differently because of the way I looked. And that was something that obviously stuck with me for many years. And growing up in the city, in a not a very diverse community, but a blue collar area, I didn't see a lot of resources to mental health. I didn't see a lot of things that I had access to that would help me with whatever I was going through, because I didn't even know I was going through anything, to be quite honest with you. The assimilation had been so apparent. But today, again, as people have referenced, you know, with what's going on in our world today, the voices that were silenced for so many years, including my own, you know, are finally finding a voice, finding a way to, you know, put that out there, that, you know, those behaviors are not going to be tolerated, and those who've not been getting the help that they so desperately want and need are going to have access to it. And we're here tonight to hopefully break down, or begin breaking down, some of those barriers that are preventing people of color from accessing, you know, the services that are out there for all of us.
Well, thank you, Phil, and thank you, each one of you, for those introductions. We look forward to hearing more from you as our conversation continues. So to start this evening, we have a very special treat for all of you. We're going to share a trailer for an upcoming short film written and produced by Alicia.
Sorry, guys, hang on, bear with me here. I want to be sure I can get this. Uh-oh, let's try again. All right, here we go. That sometimes happens.
So I told a lot of lies. I say there were more flowers on the tree or the bush that needed to be, because that was my world to escape into. I began to build a very high, thick wall. Nobody's going to penetrate this. You don't realize how much PTSD, how much trauma happens every single day in very many households, not just to women, but to young men too. I'm valuable because I'm here, you know, not because I'm someone's wife, because I'm here, you know. And I had to learn that it's all right if you love me, but what's more important is if you value me. I have to heal. And in my process, the freer I get, the freer you get. I can't fix you. I have to fix me and allow you to see the change.
Oh,
Wow.
There we go.
I must have watched it like 1,000 times. Alicia, that is such a powerful trailer, and it addresses a lot of the remaining taboos in communities of color around mental health and the stigma that's associated with mental illness. And so can you share more about this project with all of us? We're very curious, and we want to hear where this came from for you.
yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'm actually getting a little teary-eyed. Even though I've been working on this, it's like seeing it in a different light. So thank you so much for just giving me this opportunity. This all came from a personal story. It all came from me. And as a visual creator, as a visual producer, I wanted to share that. But I wanted to share my story through the lens of mental health. And I personally struggle with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. Like I said, even though I'm from Flint, Michigan, Chicago really has groomed me to become the woman that I am today. And through that journey, I learned a lot about myself and my history. It turns out that generational abuse, but beyond sexual, physical, and mental abuse has been embedded in a lot of, I mean, let's be honest, between the Native Americans and African Americans. And I'm just speaking just about specifically in the US, but it's been happening all over the world: genocide, takeovers, I mean, you know, oppression. This is trauma, this is generational curses. That's how I process them. And so I wanted to showcase, like, hey, not only do I need to heal, I feel like it's also an opportunity to gift this platform for my ancestors who could not speak, my parents who was shamed into silence. The woman who's actually narrating this piece is my mother-in-law. I love her so much. Our relationship and our bond is very special and unique, and she inspires me so much, and I'm so grateful to have her a part of this journey. Yeah, I am still in production of working on this. This has been very dear, and to be honest, I just really wanted to create a community in Chicago that I did not see, and I was just tired of being left with no answers. And so I started doing this. I paid for everything. Like, this came out of I invested into my community. I became an advocate, a voice for those, and I put on showcases to where other people could do that as well. And so that's what I want to do and continue to do with this.
Well, thank you for sharing your story, and even in the chat, people are thanking you.
Thank you.
For sharing your story, and are excited about seeing the short film, the movie, when it's done. So make sure that you share with us where people can see the trailer. And speaking of, generational trauma and oppression, and in your introductions, you all talked about what's going on right now in the world, and in particular in our nation. And I want to take just a few minutes to just talk about, with everything that's going on, how do you take care of yourself? How have you been processing the things that are going on in the world and within communities of color, within your community? Phil, would you maybe like
Sure,
to?
I'd be happy to. Honestly, one of the things that I have to find myself doing is limiting my exposure to the news out there. I have to disseminate. I can't overload on it, because it would be so easy to do. I mean, you can't, with so many channels and so many resources available via the internet and so forth, we can actually be there as it's happening. And I don't really need to be there as it's happening, but I do need to keep abreast on what is happening out there. So that's one thing, as I limit myself. But when you talked about self-care, one of the top things, just before the whole COVID thing kicked into place, I started practicing yoga for myself. It was something I always had an interest in. And it was like a fish finding water for the first time. It was something that helped my mental health, my physical health. And as I said, before COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement arose, I was doing that, and little did I know how I was preparing myself mentally for such a time as this. But just that self-care, it's not something I've been doing over the last few months. It's something that I need to pay attention to as a mental health professional. I don't just want to talk the talk. I want to walk the walk that I ask my patients to embark on. So, but I also find myself attending rallies, because I feel like that voice needs to be heard. I can't just sit back and say, hey, way to go, way to get out there and way to represent. I want to be that example, not just in my community, but in my home. I have 2 young daughters that, that I'm very proud of, who are also very active in the movement, and are very, have very strong voices. And I want them to see that, their voice matters, their opinion matters, the things that they care about, they matter. And so what better way to do that than by setting an example for them.
Great example. Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Phil. Swati, would you like to share?
Sure. Yeah, I think, kind of echoing, Phil, what you said, I think really figuring out that time for yourself to turn it off. I think there's a good balance, I try to find the balance between continuing to educate myself, by attending webinars and seminars and things like that, but then when's that time to kind of turn it off and let myself kind of recoup, so that I'm able to give myself to my clients or my family and things like that. As far as self-care, I do have an 8-month-old baby, so that takes up a lot of my time, and it's just fun being around her. And that's kind of my way of decompressing a little bit too.
Well, new mom, enjoy your new baby. And make sure you also, my mother used to say, when your baby sleeps, you sleep.
Right.
That never worked out for me, but that's what she used to tell me.
It hasn't worked out too well for me either, but I try when I can.
Right. And certainly, Alicia, would you also like to share with us?
Yes. I write. I write out, or if I don't have anything available, I will record myself just talking. So I have personal sessions with myself where I do go back and practice mindfulness and figure out really what is a trigger. Why am I bothered? And I'm very curious about my health journey. And so I probably do teen too much. You're like, girl, don't you? And so I see a therapist in addition to that. So like I'm doing extra work, but for fun.
Yes.
I will say that and I don't mean, I'm gonna make it. I have like an impulse of just singing everything. Like I'll turn anything into a song. Like that is just what I do. I don't know. It's just, I've been doing that since I was a kid, and everyone knows when we should start singing, that's the spirit. It's just a spirit. I don't know. So that's what I do.
Feel free to break out in song if you want to give an answer in a song. We will love it, right? Everybody, we will just love it. Just feel free.
You know what? Actually, it's so funny because another thing, okay, I'm sorry. So another thing I do is I have an app where I color. And so I'll just be there on there coloring it up, and I'll just start singing my little heart out. I'm like, it just, yeah, I do little quirky things.
Hey, this is good. You're not alone, right? We all have things that we do. You just have the courage to share with everybody.
Color.
Right,
Andrew,
right.
if I could piggyback on Alicia just a little bit, because one of the things I did not mention that she mentioned is I also see a therapist. You know, I'm not just a therapist, I see a therapist. So I get that help. Like I said, that I encourage people to do as well, because I need that just like anyone else.
Yep.
You know, and thank you for sharing that, because this is what this conversation is about. This is, you know, the first of many conversations that we hope to have, where we're talking about these really important issues that are meaningful to everyone. So thank you very much. I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat. A news diet, I hadn't heard that. That was great. Thanks for dropping that in. Some people said generational trauma is real, therapy is great. So we thank you all for participating and engaging with us through the chat. So we want to get to some more questions so we can hear a little bit more from our panelists. So Swati, you are in private practice and you are a psychologist. And you mentioned when you introduced yourself about shame and stigma in South Asian community. Can you talk a little bit about how you address shame and stigma in individuals, how you've addressed it maybe in your life or in the lives of families that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my work with children and adolescents revolves around providing that education of mental illness, not only to the individual, but within the family. So particularly my work within the South Asian community, much of the focus for me, for my sessions, becomes on normalizing mental illness for the parents, educating them on how to respond to the children, how to react to them. If you know, for instance, if I see a child is struggling with schoolwork, a lot of times I kind of, the response that I might get from parents is having them, you know, focus a little bit more on school and stressing the importance of education and things like that. So my role I see in that is really allowing the parents to take a step back and see and talk to their children about, you know, what's the underlying anxiety related to, and empathizing with their child and just the underlying emotions, so that we can together come up with a plan that feels doable, not just for, you know, the parents, the child, but for everyone together, and it doesn't add pressure in those situations. So that's kind of my work with children and adolescents. Like I said, in the past year, I started working with expecting and new parents. My journey with that did start when I was pregnant about a year ago, but also because during my pregnancy, I just attended a seminar that explained just the vast disparities of perinatal mental health of people within people of color. So just to kind of give an idea of that, about 10 to 15% of women in the US are diagnosed with postpartum depression. In Black women, that rate is doubled. In Latinas, that rate is 30 to 43%. Due to actually the stigma of mental health, there's not a lot of statistical data on how prevalent that is within the South Asian community. But that was kind of my time to say, this is what's needed. We need, therapists who are minorities to kind of work in this specific population. And then specifically kind of to go a little bit more into that, but in the Black community, there's that added concern of healthcare. So just to kind of bring a little bit of light to that disparity, Black women are 2 to 6 times more likely to die from complications of pregnancy and birth. And Black infants are 2 times more likely to die within the first year after birth than white children are. So all of that was very, surprising and shocking to me. But it just kind of shows how these disparities come from the impacts of racism and how those have an effect on us in a cognitive, behavioral, relational level. And that leads to an increase in anxiety and depression and thus medical issues as well. So that said, my work with this population is first and foremost just educating myself better and understanding these disparities to be able to create that space to have that conversation with people of color. And also just understanding how other racial stigmas play a role in the stress for new parents, for example, gender roles, other cultural expectations for women and things like that, and how those negatively affect postpartum mental health.
Well, Swati answered all the questions. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm just kidding. No, that you said so much, and I hope everyone was listening. Though the statistics that you gave really frame our understanding of the disparities in healthcare. You talked about the impact of racism, the layers of racism. And one of the things when you started, you talked about the importance of education and awareness of what mental health is and what mental illness is to address stigma specifically in the South Asian community. So thank you very much. I want to stay on this theme of therapy. Mm-hmm. And I want to pivot a little bit to Phil. Phil shared with us that he also sees a therapist, and thank you for sharing that as a therapist, which is really important. We know how powerful therapy is and can be a tool. Swati talked about some of these, but what are some barriers you think that exist for people of color in seeking treatment, and why do you think folks remain silent about their own suffering? And Alicia, I would like for you to weigh in on this as well, please.
Those are great topics. One of the things that I see consistently, I feel, in working with primarily teenagers and high school age kids, is the disparity with how they are viewed. And those words keep coming up, disparity and stigma, whenever we're talking about these things. But very often when a Latino youth or a Black teen expresses rage or anger, it's like, oh, there's that hot Latin temper, or there's that angry Black man. And what we're seeing expressions of depression and anxiety. We're seeing, the surface, which is the very aggressive behavior, but we miss what's the underneath, the depression or the anxiety, which again is very personal to myself. So rather than having them sent to the counselor's office or having an evaluation done, we're seeing, law enforcement brought in, or suspensions, or even to the point of expulsion. Whereas I might have someone who's not a person of color who may have exhibited the same behavior, but they're being sent for a mental health evaluation. Well, why the disparity? Because we definitely have a stereotype or a judgment that when someone acts out this way, they must be, reacting to their roots, rather than there must be maybe there's something else here. Maybe there's something beyond the scope of what we're seeing, So we're very often jumping the gun, and like I said, whether it's being put directly into the legal system or it's a suspension or an expulsion. we do know it exists, and we also know that very often, even though that we were seeing some change in that when they do step into the office of a mental health professional, it's either not someone that looks like them, or not someone that speaks their language, or not someone they can connect with. And in my office, my gosh, I mean, you can see in the background, I have myself splashed all over my office. If my patients can't connect with me, then I can't do my job. So I always think that if I'm walking into some place, or if anyone from that perspective is walking into a place and they see a stranger or a strange environment, or just, you know, feel that discomfort, immediately they're going to shut down. They're not going to share. They're not going to put the reasons out why we're there. So we're just going to go with any of our preconceived presumptions. So it is definitely a constant battle, and it's something that we need to change. We need to see change at all levels. That, you know, it can't be that quick. Okay, you're out of here. It's like, you know, let's look a little deeper into this.
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. And our attendees agree with you. They are co-signing very much so, that they can definitely relate. I'm going to read one comment. They need to see and feel our anger and rage and understand why we are feeling the way we feel. We need someone that can understand our depression and see the root of that depression, and pluck that root and make us okay. That is powerful. And I think that in the very beginning, someone commented that trauma is real, generational trauma is real, and racism and trauma and discrimination, they all affect mental health, right? They definitely affect mental health, and I think that you summarized that very well. So Alicia, would you like to share a response or have anything to add?
I think Phil presented that perfectly. I really can't even, I won't even tell you.
I know, I mean, you
That's
all,
on you.
I mean, our panelists are rock stars here. Absolutely, absolutely. It was very well stated. I'm going to jump into a question here, if that's okay, panelists, that we have. With the current inequities and lack of access to high quality mental health care, what would the panelists like to see happen to increase services for Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color? I think that this is a very timely question. So what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, I would like to just put this out. I did do some research on this because I was a little bothered. But one of the things that is happening right now is this shaming of Kanye West. And this is very relevant because he's been speaking out and running for presidency. And we all are aware and know. And if you don't know, this man has been diagnosed of bipolar disorder. If you don't know what that is, that's fine. But know that it is a mental illness. It is. Now, personally, I'm really affected by the way that the media has treated him and bullied him into correction. And at the same time, it seems as if, well, I'm watching adults that's older than me and peers that are participating in this. And then you wonder why children are acting out and participating in such bullying and traits of these behaviors. Mm-hmm. And so I actually know people who suffer and are being triggered right now by what is happening to this man who has access and who has money and status, and he is still being targeted. I'm really personal and really tied into this specific topic. And of course, I think they didn't do that though with Tony, well, the guy that played Tony Stark. I mean, I forgot his name. Y'all help me out. But
Robert Downey Jr.
Yes, Robert Downey Jr. Thank you. Like, he had a string of abuse, drug abuse. They didn't drag that man. And I mean, and I'm only bringing the differences because of the race. You know what I mean? It's just you throw Black people or even people of color, especially in the LGBTQ community. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just dismissed. I don't understand it. It's complicated. I don't want to. Let's just dismiss it. And I really think that targeting individuals with known mental illness should be a hate crime. Period. Like it's you're really affecting, you're killing someone mentally, like you are, and it needs to stop. And I think we need to take it more serious and hold people accountable. That's where I think that needs to change, and that starts with the people at the top, to be honest.
So I think what you're saying is, like, you know, we have to hold ourselves accountable in how we are treating others, whether it's Kanye West or our neighbor, because we're seeing this, and we're seeing the differences in, you know, how a Kanye West might be treated versus a Robert Downey Jr. and other celebrities who have mental illness. So I think that that's a really good frame for us, Alicia. And again, lots of people are agreeing because it's very important for us. So increasing services, what are some thoughts? Swati, I was going to ask you about, you know, one of the things you talked about in working with South Asian families is the fact that you also identify as South Asian. So what about workforce equity? Phil, you talked about that too, the importance of connection, people of color being able to connect with treatment providers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that change can't really happen in the healthcare system unless there's an accurate representation of people of color within the healthcare field. So I think people of color need to be heard, have a say in administrative policies, and have roles of authority and power to even be able to feel comfortable in speaking up about these issues. I think without the roles of authority or power, or being seen as your own people of color within the field, it becomes hard for people to speak up because there is that fear of maybe losing jobs or the ramifications that come with that. So Alicia, kind of how you said, it starts with top down. I think there needs to be that representation throughout the field.
I think I saw one person who's with us comment that her OBGYN disregarded her high blood pressure. And so in thinking about healthcare providers and how, research has shown, when Black women go and to seek healthcare and they are having difficulties, their heart disease and high blood pressure and things of that nature are less likely to be identified by healthcare providers than their white counterparts. And that's a problem. It's a huge problem that, I think we all would agree is rooted in systemic racism and privilege and all of the things that we are now talking about and addressing and feel marching for and creating spaces for, and all of the things that we're doing here. So are there any other things that you think need to happen in order to increase access? I know this is like a huge topic. Everyone who's attending, we've allotted an hour, and I feel like we already have our next topics and our discussions. Thank you for your chats. We're going to do our very best to get to your feedback and questions. If you do have questions, please drop them in the Q&A. And I'd love for our panelists to respond. But is there anything else that you can think of in terms of increasing access and to care?
I think just the simple question of access are having quality mental health facilities in the communities where they're needed, rather than having to travel, especially in these days of COVID, but even before that, it was just having access to something that was nearby rather than having to travel to another entirely different community. Again, we create that discomfort, that feeling out of place, that feeling like all eyes are on us, and any person who's a person of color who goes someplace where there's not, we all know what that feels like, to be stared at or to be taken. And when we're in our most vulnerable place, we want to be in a place that we are comfortable. And as far as the destigmatization goes, I think addressing these things at all community levels, and I think in the Hispanic community, just how very much it's entrenched entrenched in spirituality and faith and church, you know, making presentations, which I fortunately had the opportunity to do, to say, you know, it's okay to seek outside help, because like I think Swati was talking about the Asian community, that it was seen as something that was wrong if you were going out to see. It was not the right thing to do. You don't let any other people in on your business, they used to say on the South Side. But we want to take that away, and again, showing not just the access, but the familiarity is something that we need to bring to the stage.
So I'm glad you said that, Phil. You mentioned faith and church and spirituality, and we've talked a lot about therapy. We have two therapists with us here today, and those are more traditional modes of treatment. Nothing wrong with that, but when you're talking about communities of color, what are some other informal strategies of support or peer support that can be helpful? And I'm going to let that lead into Ms. Alicia, who is working to be, if I correct me, a holistic mental health coach. Is that correct? Did I get it?
That's it. That's it.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So talk to us about that and what that looks like.
Yeah, so I'm actually in the beginning process. It really started to click this year once this pandemic happened. I've been getting a lot of people reaching out asking for input and feedback and just to share my story. And so I really want to be a knowledgeable resource. And so I am now taking that time to use that wisely and educate myself on the actual alternative and healthy alternative ways that we can seek healing in non-traditional spaces and ways. I love music, so I feel like music and gyms and energies, that's all what I'm about. And so holistic mental health coaches is more so of an experience than it will be just it's a counseling is when you're like going specifically for a specific problem. This will be just, hey, we're going to leave that alone. We're going to leave that out. We're just going to have this experience right here, right now. Because sometimes you just need a moment, you know, and of course, I just think that in addition to therapy, I think having them two together would definitely help and benefit so that you can have balance. I think that is very important. So and I definitely don't, I go to therapy. I don't know if y'all heard me, but I go to therapy every weekly. That's 4 times a month. So I really do believe in therapy, but I also know that everyone learns different, everyone adapts to different things. And so this would really made me think about taking this a little bit more serious. So yeah.
Well, I love that. I love that journey that you're on. I'll ask our panelists, are there any things that you've seen that you're, in your life or that your clients have used that don't fit in that traditional, when you think of traditional mental health treatment, but are more non-traditional ways of support?
I think any type of peer support group, and the thing that pops into mind is I have quite a few youth who are very involved in music, and whether they're involved, attending music schools or music programs, that's a great expressive way to, just that expression, that getting out there, but that interacting, that engaging, that collaborating with others. I think it's such a powerful thing. So, very often when music or movies or theater is another thing that, when we kind of get outside of those traditional ones, things that are more expressive, things that, we can, I think somebody talked about writing or coloring. Yeah. Those things that we don't think of as necessarily therapeutic or childish things. It's like, well, that's, as a child, that's how we expressed ourselves. So we can still find that in our adulthood as well.
And we can just be like Alicia when we grow up and create our and star in our own film. giving others that platform, right? Creating a culture for other people who are drawn to that energy of creating, and as your title of your short film, Living Your Truth. Okay. So I have another question. What is, and you've shared some of these things, what is one myth about mental health that you would like to debunk right now. Go on the record. And it could be something that somebody has said, some culturally held belief. What's one thing, if it were your last words that you could speak, one thing that you just want to debunk right now? Uh-oh, Alicia's
I think
hand.
Alicia has something.
Her hand is up. Okay, go ahead, Alicia.
I'm sorry, y'all, but this one, I come from a religious background, and in a religious magnitude, mental illness is damnation. You're going to hell. Like you're the devil. You're basically shamed into anything living life, and it's very toxic.
Mhm.
And I'm still healing on it. That's a part of my healing journey 2020. I'm working through it, but
Okay.
that one right there is just it gets me. So I'm gonna mute myself.
I think a lot of people feel you on that, Alicia. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Someone said, or give it to Jesus, or you just don't have enough faith, or you need to pray a little more. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm the moderator, not a panelist. Let me go back to moderating. Swati and Phil, do you either of you have anything you'd like to add about one myth that you'd like to debunk about mental health?
The one that jumps to my mind is you have to be crazy to go get help, or you have to hit bottom to go get help. You have to be, faced with no other decision. It's like, we want to intervene before we get to that point. We just, if we see a sign, and that's one of the things that we talk about very often in our talks with AFSP, is looking for signs, because we don't want to do it, after the horse is out of the barn. We want to keep it in there and try and control it as best we can while we can. So I think, to say that there is something, you talk to therapist, you talk to a counselor, you must be crazy. No, that's not the case. So I think that's one of the ones I like to burst the bubble on.
Yeah, I think similarly, I often hear that seeking help is a sign of weakness. And I just told recently that dealing with, your own mental illness is a sign of an individual getting stronger on their own. So I think this myth just prevents people from seeking help. Vulnerability is hard, and I hope that that's recognized as a strength.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we could probably have a whole session about a whole discussion, right, about the things that we've heard, because people on the in the chat are telling us lots that it doesn't exist, that it's in your head. So all of that is very important. Thank you all for sharing. I do also want to, I see Dimple jumping back on, so I think that means that we need to get to the questions, to the Q&A. For all of you watching, I needed some prompts because, I get really excited. So we're going to go to a couple of questions. Can someone address access to services regarding native languages? Thank you for that question. Very important. And I know that Swati is, I don't know if it's bilingual or trilingual. But she speaks a couple different ones. So can you share about access to services in native language? I'm one of those people that believes that people should get services. And we talked about being comfortable, feeling a connection, but also in the language that they're most comfortable with. So I know I called you Swati, but feel free, Phil and Alicia, to answer as well.
Yeah, I think that, especially in the South Asian culture, and I spoke a lot to, working with parents and working with, that generation, because I know a lot of the work when it comes with children comes with working with the parents. But that is a big barrier in getting access to treatment, because they, even though they may feel somewhat comfortable or may know a little bit of English, it might not be their first language. And so I do see where that becomes, an issue in them even wanting to take that time out in a session to talk to the therapist and things like that. So fortunately, I like you said, I am bilingual. I speak Hindi, and then I also speak Punjabi, which is just a dialect of Hindi. So that is, that is definitely an area that I would like to see a little bit more and being able to address some of those barriers.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Phil, did you want to add anything, or Alicia, or we can go to the next question if you want to.
Just, interestingly, I am not bilingual, and with my surname and having grown up in Chicago, a lot of people will assume that I am. So I do see the importance of people that identify. And for me, it hasn't been as much of a barrier because primarily I'm working with the teenagers, and a lot of times the translation issues come in with the parents. So I always want them to be comfortable and know that, that there are access to services, but they certainly are harder to find than the more traditional.
So I think that's one of the things, going back to the first question, increasing services for Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color is not only having services that are culturally sensitive, but also linguistically appropriate, right? I think that's very important. And then we have a question here. Do both therapists consider alcoholism and bipolar when treating their patients? I'm not sure if it's a question about just dual diagnosis in general. So if either of you can respond to that.
I mean, I think it definitely, for me, is what's the presenting problem, what's brought this in. And I don't want to make it like it's a chicken and egg kind of thing. If somebody's experiencing problems with alcohol, did the alcohol make them depressed, or did the depression lead them to the alcohol? So I'm not always jumping on that. But if I do, if there are substance abuse issues, which is another one of my specialty areas, especially with teenagers, I am naturally going to, why are we, what is it, what are we escaping from? Why are we using these alternate realities or altered states? So typically I will find some sort of mental health issue behind some of the depression and anxiety when they're in question.
Okay, thank you, Phil. I'm sorry, Swati.
I was just going to say, substance abuse is not necessarily my area of expertise, but it comes up for sure, and that's that's when, like Phil said, you kind of have to tease out what's actually, what are the symptoms that we're actually treating. Is it the substance abuse? For that, I typically tend to refer out, or is it, and even similar with bipolar disorder, what are the actual symptoms that we're working on treating, as opposed to maybe the label.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. Now I want to let folks know, I promised Phil that we would wrap up on time, and our team, because Phil has to work. He has some clients scheduled, so we want to be respectful. We don't want him ducking out on this, because his perspective and experience has been so rich. So we're going to take one last question. I think it's a very, very good question. All the questions were great. This question and I love the word, has sufficient research been done in Black, Indigenous, and people of color populations to know what the best evidence-based treatments are for different diagnoses? So that question, that answer is fairly simple. The answer would be no. There has not been sufficient research done on evidence-based treatments for people of color. Oftentimes medications that we use to treat disorders people of color are not used in those trials. So we have a long way to go in identifying how best to treat and support people of color who are dealing with very real mental health conditions. So yes, that was a great question. All of the questions have been really great. We appreciate everyone, all of our panelists, and I see that our team has been really active in the chat, giving you links and resources, connecting with our panelists. So your information is in the chat if people want to get in contact with you, to support you in your work, your short film, Alicia. People can't wait.
Yes.
Can't wait for it. And we certainly have enjoyed our conversation this evening. And I feel like it's been too short, but we are going to wrap up. We want to thank you to each of our panelists and all of our attendees. Thank you for showing up and supporting and being so engaging in our conversation. Yes, thank you all for coming. And thank our panelists for helping us to better understand the intersection of race and stigma and mental health. We do have some resources for you that Angela is going to put on the screen. There's several pages of resources. So if you get your camera out real quick, Dimple will also put the link to the resources in the chat. This is important. Again, AFSP does a lot of work in mental health and suicide prevention. And so we want to, let you know that there are resources. If you think someone might be suicidal, it's very important that, you have these resources. Assume that you're the only one who will reach out. I always say when I do suicide prevention trainings that you have to trust your gut. We also have some resources that AFSP has put together for people of color. This is not exhaustive. It's on the next slide. Mental health resources for diverse communities. Again, these resources can be found on AFSP's website, /minority mental health. Again, certainly not exhaustive, but great resources. I have taken time to check many of those resources out. Please, Dimple, make sure that you put that in the chat for people that they can get some additional information. Again, if you want to continue to be part of this conversation with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Illinois chapter, or if you are interested in the work that we do, these are ways to be connected with us. Please email us. We want you to follow us on social media, visit our website. We want to thank each and every one of you this evening who joined us. And Phil, I have 1 minute. We did it, team. We did it. Thank you all very much for your time, your engagement.
And also, just to end with that too, somebody asked how often we will be having these panels. So this is the first of many, and please look out from emails from us and on Facebook and social media. We will be sending out shortly our next panel discussion with other voices being heard. If you want to be involved in a panel with us, please also email us. We would love to feature you and have your voice heard as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Everybody.
Great job, everybody. Wonderful. Thank you.